My parents favored my brother so much, I almost gave up. Then I discovered their dark secret. I've been invisible for as long as I can remember, and I don't mean like people don't see me. They do. But in my family, being seen didn't mean being valued. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I was the older sibling, 22 now. And yet somehow, my parents made it painfully clear that my younger brother, Jason, was the golden child. I still remember one afternoon when I was 9. I had spent months working on a science project for the school fair, a miniature solar system that actually rotated around the sun using tiny motors and magnets. I stayed up late, soldering wires and painting planets, and I thought, this is it. This will finally get them to notice me. The night of the fair, my parents drove me there. They smiled politely at my project, barely glancing at the intricate planets. Then, across the room, Jason had built a model volcano that erupted with baking soda and vinegar. Cute, messy, and loud. My parents gasped, clapped, and cheered like he'd just invented the cure for cancer. Jason, look at that eruption. Isn't it amazing? Mom said, ruffling his hair. Dad nodded, proud smile plastered across his face. Meanwhile, I stood to the side, clutching my solar system, my chest tightening as the excitement swirled around me without ever touching me. Thanks, I muttered, my voice shrinking in the crowd. I can still feel that sinking pit in my stomach, the moment I realized that no matter how much effort I put in, it would never be enough to earn their kind of attention. And that pattern never changed. From birthdays to report cards, family dinners to holidays, Jason always got the spotlight. My parents hung his drawings on the fridge while mine were tucked away in a drawer. He was praised for anything and everything, even things that required no effort. Throwing a football, finishing a video game, or just flashing a smile at the right moment. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, responsible one, which in my house translated to forgettable. High school didn't help. I was the nerd who straight A'd in AP classes, juggling extracurriculars and part-time work. Jason, of course, was a charming athlete, always surrounded by friends, always praised for his natural charisma. Teachers loved him, coaches adored him, and my parents hung on every word he said. Me, I learned to speak softly, to smile politely, to step aside so Jason could shine. At home, the imbalance was obvious in ways that hurt more than words could describe. Family dinners were like award ceremonies for Jason. Every story he told was met with laughter and encouragement. Every small victory was turned into a family celebration. Meanwhile, I had to fight just to be acknowledged. I remember one Christmas when I baked cookies for everyone. I spent hours perfecting them, decorating them meticulously. When I brought them to the table, my mom barely looked up from Jason's new guitar, praising him for strumming a few simple chords. "Wow, Jason, you're so talented," she gushed. Dad chimed in, "You're going to be famous someday. Just wait." And me? I sat there, holding a plate of cookies that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, slowly realizing that my effort meant nothing. Not because it wasn't good, but because it wasn't Jason. I won't lie. There were moments I resented him deeply. I envied the way he could charm anyone, get out of trouble with a shrug, and have our parents wrapped around his finger. But I also loved him. I had to because he was my brother, but loving him didn't make it easier to swallow the sting of being invisible. It wasn't just the big things either. Even small moments cut deep. I'd bring home awards from school, writing competitions, science fair recognition, perfect attendance, and I'd get a smile, a nod, maybe a good job. Jason would come home with an average grade in gym class or a sketchy excuse for missing homework, and my parents would celebrate it like he'd climbed Mount Everest. It was humiliating. I learned to hide my frustration. I learned to smile when my heart was breaking. I became the perfect wallflower, the girl who quietly took care of herself, always watching Jason get everything I felt I deserved. I internalized it, told myself it wasn't about me, that maybe I was too sensitive. But deep down, I knew it was about me, and it hurt. High school was particularly cruel because of social pressures. Jason dated the popular girls, went to all the parties, and still came home to parental praise. I stayed in, studying or working on projects, and received the same tired nods. I learned to mask my disappointment with sarcasm and humor, but it never stopped the loneliness. I started comparing myself to him constantly. At 16, I would sit in my room and stare at the ceiling, thinking, what is wrong with me? Why am I not enough? Why can't I be like him? It wasn't that I wanted to be him. I wanted my own parents to see me, to really see me. But every attempt felt like shouting into the void. The tension at home wasn't just emotional, it spilled into my daily life. I was anxious, constantly seeking validation, afraid to make mistakes that would somehow confirm their supposed disappointment in me. Jason, on the other hand, breezed through life, seemingly untouchable. And every time I faltered, every small mistake I made, I felt the weight of their silent disappointment. Even family vacations felt like a showcase for Jason. I remember one summer trip to Florida. Jason's kite got stuck in a tree, and instead of scolding him, Mom clapped her hands in excitement, telling him what a brave little adventurer he was. I caught a jellyfish on the beach while trying to help, got stung, and all I got was a "be careful next time" as she looked back to Jason. I began to realize something terrifying. My parents weren't just favoring Jason, They were shaping our entire lives around him. Their love wasn't unconditional, it was calculated, and I was never the beneficiary. Despite it all, I tried to hold on to my own sense of self. I poured myself into school, my writing, little creative projects that made me feel alive. I had friends who appreciated me, who understood my worth, but at home, I felt trapped in a golden cage of silence and invisibility. Even as I grew older, it didn't get easier. At college, I tried to thrive independently, but the memories of home lingered like a shadow. Every time I called, my parents would gush over Jason's achievements, as if I'd accomplished nothing in comparison. I wanted to scream, to demand recognition, but instead, I smiled, swallowed my pride, and listened. By the time I graduated, I realized I had two choices: let their favoritism define me, or find a way to assert my own identity. That realization didn't come with relief. It came with bitterness, frustration, and an almost overwhelming sense of loss. How could I compete with a lifetime favoritism? How could I even begin to reclaim myself when my own family seemed determined to ignore me? I knew, deep down, that there had to be more to their behavior. There had to be a reason why they treated Jason like he could do no wrong, while I constantly felt inadequate. And I also knew that if I wanted to survive, I needed to understand it. Because without that understanding, I would never truly escape the shadow of my own family. And that's where my story begins. I thought I had grown used to being invisible, to being the one everyone ignored while Jason floated through life in the spotlight. But nothing could prepare me for hitting rock bottom. And that's exactly what happened the day I got my rejection letter from the graduate program I dreamed about for years. I remember holding the envelope in my hands like it weighed 1,000 pounds, my fingers trembling. I had sacrificed so much for this. Late nights, skipped parties, endless essays, research projects that left me exhausted. But apparently, it wasn't enough. Not in their eyes, not in anyone's eyes. I tore the letter open, scanned the rejection, and felt my world tilt sideways. I called my mom first, hoping maybe, just maybe, she'd understand. "Mom, I got the rejection," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, honey, I'm sure you'll get in somewhere else," she replied, her tone distant, as if she were soothing a minor inconvenience rather than acknowledging years of hard work. "And Jason?" I asked, almost bitterly. "He got accepted into that elite program for athletes, the one he barely applied for because of his football stats. Did you call him?" There was a pause. Then, "Well, Jason's always had a natural talent. You're smart, Emily, but, not everyone can be perfect at everything." Perfect. Of course. Jason was perfect. Always had been, and no amount of effort on my part could ever change that. That moment, holding that rejection onto my hands while my parents celebrated my brother's mediocrity, I felt a surge of something dangerous. Anger. But it wasn't just anger, it was desperation. I realized I couldn't keep letting their favoritism dictate my life, my worth, my sense of self. Over the next few days, my frustration grew. I couldn't sleep. Every time I walked past Jason's room, I felt a mix of envy and disbelief. He was laughing with friends on a video call, telling his parents about a new scholarship he didn't even deserve in my eyes. And mom and dad were listening, nodding, smiling, clearly proud. And me, I was supposed to just nod along, smile, and pretend it didn't hurt. It was around that time I started noticing little things, small inconsistencies that didn't make sense before. Mom would take secret phone calls in the kitchen and whisper so softly I couldn't hear anything. Dad would disappear for hours into his study, locking the door behind him, papers scattered across the desk when he returned. Even Jason had his own little oddities, sudden trips, unexplained cash, the way he looked guilty for no reason. I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's normal for families to have secrets, but these weren't just normal. Something felt off, like a puzzle where one piece was deliberately hidden. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wanted answers, but I also felt terrified of what I might find. It started innocently. I checked the family computer under the guise of helping with taxes. I looked through old emails, receipts, and files that weren't mine, hoping to find a clue. And then there were the whispers I caught when walking past the kitchen at night. Fragments of conversations like, "Not yet," "She can't know," and "Everything depends on him." You know that. My heart would pound, but I couldn't ignore it. Something was being hidden from me, and I was determined to find out what. One evening, after another night of sleepless pacing, I decided to go further. I remembered my dad's old filing cabinet in the garage. The one he always insisted was off limits because of sensitive documents. Normally, I would have backed off. Normally, I would have stayed invisible, but not that night. That night, desperation overrode fear. I crept into the garage, my hands shaking as I pried open the cabinet. Dust coated the folders inside, the smell of old paper and secrets heavy in the air. My fingers grazed file after file, scanning for anything that seemed out of place. And then I found it. A folder labeled Jason Carter Financials Plans. My stomach dropped. I flipped it open. Receipts, letters, bank statements, and something that made my blood run cold. Plans. Calculated, detailed plans showing how my parents had manipulated situations, funneled money, and even orchestrated opportunities specifically for Jason. Not only that, there were notes about me, Emily, listed almost like a liability, a potential obstacle to Jason's success. I stared at the papers, trembling. This wasn't favoritism. This was deliberate, systematic manipulation. My parents weren't ignoring me by accident. They were actively shaping a world where Jason thrived and I remained expendable. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt something sharper, more focused, clarity, and anger. Raw, burning anger. But alongside that anger was fear. What else had they been hiding? How long had this been going on? What else did Jason know? And most importantly, what would happen if they discovered that I knew? That night, I sat on the garage floor, the folder clutched to my chest, my mind racing. I realized I had a choice. Ignore it, pretend it didn't exist, continue to live as the overlooked daughter, or dig deeper, uncover the full truth, and finally understand the world I had been trapped in. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every whisper in the hallway, every memory of being dismissed or overshadowed replayed in my mind. And somewhere in that chaos, a plan started forming. I wasn't going to let them control my life anymore. Not my opportunities, not my worth, not my identity. But as I looked through those files, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't going to be easy. There was a reason they had been so careful, so meticulous in hiding this. And uncovering it meant stepping into a world I wasn't sure I was prepared for. And yet, I knew I had to try, because if I didn't, I would never know the truth. And if I didn't know the truth, I would never escape the shadow of my own family. I tucked the folder under my arm and returned it to its hiding place, pretending nothing had happened when Dad's voice echoed from the other room. But inside, everything had changed. The invisible girl no one saw had decided to fight, quietly, carefully, and relentlessly. The first piece of the puzzle was in my hands, and for the first time, I felt like I was finally seeing the world clearly. I thought discovering that folder in the garage was shocking. I thought it would be the turning point where I finally understood why my parents had favored Jason over me for my entire life. I was wrong. That was only the beginning. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents smiling at Jason's achievements, laughing at his jokes, raving over things he didn't even earn. And then the memory of the folder haunted me. The receipts, the letters, the careful planning, it wasn't just favoritism. It was deliberate, methodical. I started spending my evenings quietly at the dining table after everyone else had gone to bed, rifling through old files in the garage. I became obsessed. Each paper, each document was a piece of a puzzle that slowly painted a horrifying picture. The first real bombshell came when I found letters addressed to my parents from a law firm. I skimmed the content in disbelief. The letters detailed how my parents had funneled money into a trust that would favor Jason exclusively. They had deliberately structured investments, scholarships, even inheritance plans to ensure he had every advantage imaginable at my expense. I sank into my chair, trembling. This wasn't just negligence or favoritism. It was manipulation on a scale I couldn't have imagined. Every time they ignored my accomplishments, every time they dismissed my efforts, every time they celebrated Jason's mediocrity over my hard work, it was intentional. Flashbacks started hitting me like a tidal wave. Every memory of my childhood suddenly made sense in a horrifying new light. My science fair victories, my perfect report cards, my tireless dedication to school projects, none of it mattered. My parents weren't praising Jason because he was charming. They were praising him because they had already decided his path, and I was a hurdle to be sidelined. I remembered my 10th birthday when I had painstakingly made handmade decorations, only for my parents to hang a banner celebrating Jason's biggest touchdown yet. I had cried that night alone in my room, wondering why they couldn't just see me. Now I understood. They could see me. They just didn't want to. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined. I had loved them, trusted them, believed in them, and they had built my life around a lie. They had deliberately stunted my opportunities while crafting a golden path for my brother. As the nights went on, I found more. Bank statements showing money transferred to Jason's accounts, letters from private tutors and coaches coordinated with my parents, even correspondences hinting at favors pulled in my school and job applications to ensure Jason had the upper hand. It was meticulous, cruel, and relentless. And yet, as horrifying as it was, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of clarity. I finally knew why I had always felt inadequate, why nothing I did seemed to matter. It wasn't me, it was them. Every tear, every disappointment, every sleepless night spent trying to earn their approval, it had been orchestrated. But knowing the truth brought new questions. Did Jason know? Was he in on it, or was he as much a pawn as I had been? The thought made me pause. I loved him, but could I ever forgive him if he had been complicit? Then came the recordings. I found an old digital recorder hidden in the attic, one of those things you forget about in a drawer. When I pressed play, I heard my parents' voices from years ago, speaking about me as if I wasn't even in the room. "She's smart," my mom said, voice tinged with irritation. "But she's too independent. She won't bend the way Jason does. She'll never realize her place." My dad replied, "Keep her distracted with work and praise her occasionally so she doesn't rebel. Jason's future depends on it." I dropped the recorder. My hands shook. They had been planning this for years, structuring my life, manipulating my choices, orchestrating opportunities and obstacles, all to make Jason succeed. And all the while, they smiled, pretending to be loving, supportive parents. I felt a rush of emotions I couldn't name. Anger, betrayal, guilt. Guilt because I had unconsciously blamed myself for being not good enough. Anger because they had lied to me every day of my life. And a strange sense of empowerment because now I knew. Knowledge was power, and I had finally uncovered the truth. I sat there for hours, piecing together memories. Every family dinner, every holiday, every achievement I had celebrated alone, they were all tainted. My childhood, my teenage years, the very foundation of my self-worth, it had been manipulated. And yet something inside me stirred, something that had been dormant all my life, a voice that whispered, "You are more than they ever allowed you to be." I started to make plans, not out of revenge, not yet, but to reclaim my life. I needed evidence. I needed control. I needed to ensure that I would no longer be a pawn in their carefully crafted game. I began cataloging everything I found: letters, documents, recordings, financial statements. I made copies, hid them in a secure place, and began mapping out a timeline of events, connecting the dots between my parents' manipulations and my life experiences. It was exhausting, terrifying work, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. And through it all, I realized something crucial. Jason had been given everything, but I had something they could never take from me: my agency, my ability to think, to act, to take control. They had tried to control me, to diminish me, to make me invisible. But now, armed with the truth, I was no longer powerless. By the time I put the last document back into the hidden folder in the garage, I felt a mixture of dread and determination. Dread, because exposing the secret meant confronting them, risking everything I had ever known. Determination, because I couldn't go back to being invisible. I couldn't pretend their lies hadn't shaped my entire life. I had to face the truth, and I had to reclaim my place in the world on my own terms. As I locked the garage door and walked back into the house, the lights of the living room cast long shadows across the walls. I saw my parents smiling, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. Jason waved at me, cheerful and unaware, and I knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. The secret beneath the smiles had been unearthed. The carefully constructed illusion of a happy, perfect family was shattered in my hands, and for the first time, I felt ready, not just to confront the truth, but to take my life back, because the invisible girl was finally awake. I held the folder in my hands like a loaded gun, the evidence of years of manipulation and betrayal weighing heavily in my chest. For months, I had obsessed over it, cataloged it, traced every shadow of deceit my parents had cast over my life, and now I knew it was time. It was time to stop being invisible, time to confront the people who had spent my entire childhood keeping me in the shadows. I remember standing outside the living room that evening, hearing Jason laughing, Mom telling him how proud she was of his latest achievement, Dad nodding like the dutiful enabler he always was. I had rehearsed this confrontation 1,000 times in my mind. I had imagined yelling, crying, maybe storming out, but now I felt a strange calm. This wasn't about rage, it was about taking back my life. I walked in, folder clutched tightly, and they all turned to me. Jason's smile faltered. "Hey, Em, what's—" "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through the room. It startled even me how steady it sounded. "Stop pretending like everything's fine. I know what you've been doing." Mom laughed nervously. "Emily, what are you talking about? You're overreacting." I held up the folder. "Don't lie. Don't even try. I know about the trust funds, the money funneled to Jason, the tutors, the favors, the carefully orchestrated opportunities, everything. I know how you've spent my whole life trying to make sure Jason succeeds while I'm invisible." Dad's face went pale. Jason froze, staring at me as if he hadn't realized the game he'd been playing all along. "You don't understand," Dad stammered. "We just wanted what was best for, No," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You wanted what was best for him. You wanted him to be perfect, and in doing so, you made me feel worthless every single day of my life. You lied to me. You manipulated me. And I'm done pretending I don't see it." Mom's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered every birthday ignored, every achievement dismissed, every silent comparison that cut deeper than any words ever could. No, I didn't feel guilty. I felt liberated. Jason finally spoke, his voice low, uncertain. I didn't know it was like that. I swear I didn't." "You didn't have to know," I said, taking a step closer. "You were the beneficiary. You were the favored one. You didn't need to know because the system was built to protect you. But I did. And now I have the choice to stop being your pawn." The room was silent except for the sound of our breathing. I took a deep breath and continued. "I've spent my whole life being careful, being perfect, being quiet. All so I wouldn't upset the carefully constructed world you created for him. But I refuse to live like that anymore." I could see the panic in their eyes. Mom's lips trembled. Dad's jaw was tight. Jason's hands fidgeted nervously. And for the first time, I realized the power had shifted. "I've already made copies of this folder," I said, holding it slightly higher. "Every document, every letter, every recording. If I have to, I'll take this to a lawyer, to my university, to anyone who needs to know the truth. Because I'm done being invisible. I'm done being the girl no one cared about." I watched as reality sank in for them. The smiles, the facades, the carefully maintained illusion of a perfect family. It was crumbling in front of their eyes. Jason looked at me, a mixture of fear and guilt washing over him. "I didn't want it to be like this. I know," I said softly. "And that's why this isn't just about blame. It's about taking control, about reclaiming my life. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." From that day forward, I made a series of choices that completely changed my life. I moved out of the house, finding a small apartment where I could finally be myself without the shadow of my parents' favoritism looming over me. I applied for jobs, started building a career in a field I was passionate about, and slowly, deliberately, reconstructed my identity. Every step I took was an act of rebellion against the life they had tried to script for me. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where I felt the weight of years of neglect pressing down, but with each challenge, I grew stronger. I rebuilt my confidence piece by piece, learning to trust my instincts, to believe in my abilities, and to assert my worth. I started setting boundaries with my family, making it clear that I would no longer be manipulated or dismissed. And the more I achieved, the more I realized something profound. Their favoritism, their manipulation, it didn't define me. I had spent years internalizing their lies, believing that I was less, that I was invisible. But now, I saw myself clearly. I was capable, resilient, intelligent, and deserving of recognition. I didn't need their approval to validate my existence. Eventually, I confronted Jason again, not with anger, but with understanding. He had been as much a product of their manipulation as I had been. We talked for hours, unpacking our shared childhood, our frustrations, our pain. And for the first time, I felt a genuine connection with him, not as the overshadowed older sibling, but as equals, bound by the truth we had uncovered together. I even went public, with the evidence when necessary, exposing the manipulations to protect others from similar harm and to reclaim my life on my terms. The confrontation wasn't easy, and it ruffled feathers, but I emerged stronger, empowered, and unapologetic. Over time, I rebuilt my life. I found a career I loved, a circle of friends who valued me for who I was, and a sense of independence I had never known before. Every step was a declaration. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter. I was Emily Carter, and I had finally taken control of my story. Looking back, I realized that discovering the truth was both terrifying and liberating. The family I thought I knew was a facade, but uncovering it allowed me to see myself clearly. I had spent so many years searching for validation from people who would never give it freely, but in finding the truth, I discovered something even more important, my own strength. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I am no longer invisible. I am not defined by their favoritism, their lies, or their manipulations. I am my own person, and I finally have the life I was meant to live. Because sometimes, the hardest battles we fight are not with the world, but with the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally. And winning those battles doesn't mean hurting them. It means finding yourself. I found myself, and that was enough. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.